Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 28. The golden spire rose towards the sun, its domes burnished and brilliant to my eyes. It must be a mirage, but the city seemed so real. Stannon still led us forth through the sands and wind, sometimes muttering to himself when he thought I was out of earshot. The thought crossed my mind that I was in the middle of an unforgiving desert, following a man whose very sanity was in question. We had been traveling for a few hours, having stopped to let our horses drink from heavy water skins Stannon had prepared for the journey. I was farther than I had ever been from home. My mind wandered as the heavy dunes of sand and silt fell away behind us. Stannon had promised the next town would not be far. When I had asked him if we were going to the shining city, he had dismissed my comment as if I had never spoken. Sand blew off the tops of dunes as we rode by. They were unmarked, curving into the sky. A veritable, rippling sea of golden gray stood before us as we climbed over a rise. I could see spirals of air snaking through the untouched sand like great pillars, scattering sand and obscuring view as they passed. Far off, I could see streaking bolts of heat lightning, punctuated by dim crashes of sound. We were far enough away that I could see an entire desert storm form, spin, causing destruction, and dissipate back into nothing. This was life out here, a never-ending cycle of storms building and the stillness that follows. Gargantuan figures came abruptly into view, sand and dirt falling away in waves as the nearest storm receded. I sat in awe as I regarded the massive cliffs shaped into gigantic figures of stone and rock. Human-like heads stared sightlessly down at us from the edges of the great canyon. Their stone visages were stark and ominous. A hushed silence seemed to press at me when I looked at the titanic statues. Pale colors covered them, alabaster, onyx, a deep ochre. Primitive paints must have been used to adorn the immense figures that fell into a line along the ridge that had come into view. The wind picked up again, and the colossal faces once again became lost to view, only a giant stone hand remaining visible through the constantly blowing sand and dust. Another storm began, sharp cracks of thunder sounding as surges of electrical discharge fell down around the area. I lowered myself in the saddle and stole one last glimpse towards the unknown canyon, but was unable to pierce the raging storm that had begun. I looked back towards the direction we were heading and could see the shadows being cast by the falling sand and dirt from behind us. As we moved forward alone, the raging wind gave way to stillness again. Stannon moved with a steady determination, sitting the saddle rigidly, uncaring of the heat or elements. He pointed forwards across the rising hill of sand that lay immediately before us. Another waving image began to appear before me. An oasis, it must be. Or was it another mirage? I moved quickly to pace him, not wanting to be left behind, and be lost by time, wind, and sand. Sweat covered my brow and neck. I shifted my hat to shield myself further from the piercing glare overhead. The animals moved steadily. If they failed, surely we would as well. Steadying a hand on the reins, I unconsciously held a breath, waiting to see if the storm would rage past us or if we could continue beyond its edge. I could still see the copper and golden spires reaching into the sky ahead of us, in a city that I had been told did not exist. Dark shadows on the sand passed briefly. Without looking above, I knew they were there, birds waiting for us to give in and die. Stannon had stopped, tension held in his features like a blade, waiting to be released from its sheath. I climbed up the dune to the crest where he sat the saddle with his horse, a curious expression painting his features. "I see it," Stannon said quietly, nodding towards the far-off city. He simply sat there, stunned that it had been real. I moved forward, catching up to him, and stopped. Peering towards the image that lay in front of me, the oasis waving over the next few rises. I looked over my shoulder, back towards the city. It was still there, looming even from this distance. "Need to make a choice. We only have provisions to take us a couple more miles in this heat." Stannon seemed to be talking to himself. "Gods, but I can see it. If we try to reach it, we might just have enough water." Worried, I looked over at Stannon, not sure what to say. If we guessed wrong, we would die. The simple fact sat there in front of me, taunting me. I knew I could influence his decision, but which way should we go? The dark shadows crossed again in front of us, circling. Stannon looked over at me without speaking. Clearly he was wrestling with the decision, but did not want to involve me yet. What if it isn't real? The question I voiced hung there, unanswered, waiting. There should have been another way, another town this way, not an oasis. My map had been drawn only a few years ago. Where could the town have gone? Stannon sat there, unmoving in his saddle. The horses began to grow restless, stamping their feet lightly, nostrils flaring. Maybe the town is gone. It could be anywhere out there in the sand, and we would never find it, I said quietly. The oasis, it looks like the one I thought I saw earlier, but it was only a mirage. I think we should make for the city. Stannon looked over at me, regarding me darkly. However, he nodded his head only once before moving off to the left, towards the city. Relieved to be moving again, I wondered if I had just doomed us to a very quick, painful end. Looking back over my shoulder, the gleaming spires remained there, reflecting the sun and sky. The heat pushed at us like a living entity, anxious to wrap around us and bring us down to the earth. I knew my water skins were running dangerously low. I hoped Stannon had secreted some more water skins with him. Maddeningly, the city did not appear to grow on the horizon as we moved towards it. It remained looming tall, pushing upwards thousands of spans into the air. Closing my eyes, I began to drift off in the saddle. My horse took a step forward down the next dune and almost stumbled, causing me to open my eyes with alarm. The hush of the air around us was all-encompassing. Lights appeared to dance near the city walls, far into the distance. As we plodded on, the sun moved slowly towards the horizon, the rays growing long on the sand. The heat began to subside, but it was still dangerously dry air we breathed. We would need to drink often to stay conscious. Stannon fell in beside me, riding his horse with an almost noble bearing. It made me wonder where he learned horsemanship. He was a traveler, but I knew him to be more than that. Much more. I had seen the strange blade he wielded, although my memory had holes surrounding it. What was his real motivation? I had been so single-mindedly focused on survival that I had not spared a moment to consider what his plan for me would be. I did not voice my concerns. I knew better than to rile a dangerous man in the middle of nowhere. My continued existence was only useful so long as I increased Stannon's own chances for survival. If he should suddenly decide he had a better chance without me, given the water I would need, my tenuous situation could change abruptly. I must not forget that. He had been almost friendly to me, in a gruff manner before we had left. Was it safe to think I could trust him, just a little then? My mind was unable to decide. Better not to tempt the hand of fate, and not put it to the test if I could avoid it. I focused on what I knew. He was an assassin, or at least enjoyed killing and had no compunction against the act. He was even casual about it. Our destination could be someone he had been hired to kill. Maybe he would intend to use me to take the blame after he killed his target. Stay useful. I must stay useful, I thought furiously.